welcome everyone. I'm just going to do a short talk really, and then you can ask questions if you want to. And I just wanted to really talk very briefly. Obviously, words aren't my currency, painting is, but very briefly about why I paint what I paint and sort of how I go about it. The kind of beginning for me of the way I work the way I do is that when I arrived at Norwich School of Art back in 1986, I was at that time during my foundation and so on, I was interested in the landscape, but I mostly worked from drawings and did very meticulously detailed paintings. I was very influenced and still love the work of Stanley Spencer, his landscapes. And a tutor, Graham Giles, he's a very good painter, still with us, he said, well, you should try painting outside, try going out, if you're doing landscapes, give it a go. And I was kind of reluctant because the work became quite a lot clumsier when I worked outside. I didn't know how to do it. It was from doing these very meticulously done paintings, I was faced with a subject where in front of you the information is overwhelming. There's so much in front of you, and the light is changing in front of you, and so what I found is that I wasn't no longer in control of the style. Having had a kind of idea that I want to paint like this, I was just trying in a kind of desperate state to get across what was in front of me, the richness of it, in any way I could. And it was that there was a lot of improvisation and struggle, and it felt like a revelation. It felt a lot more alive for me. As it's something about being in front of the subject and trying to work it out as you go along and as the light is changing. So it's a dynamic process. Clicked for me into really quite a different experience. And I've been really doing that ever since. And I suppose I'll come in a minute to how I go about it, but I think the revelation for me comes down to that when we normally navigate the world in everyday life, we do so through nouns. We give things names, and that helps us categorize things in a useful way, and we can therefore travel about the world making sense of the visual stuff in front of us. But in some way or other, that process of using those nouns stops us, I feel, from getting at something quite profound about looking and being in the world. That there are so many relationships that don't have words, that are to do with that don't separate, so that a subject is a collection of things with names, and you think, well, I like that view because it's got that church there, it's got that kind of tree I like there, or there's a field of poppies over there. Instead of that, it's a set of relationships between colours, space, light, form, things with weight, things that seem ethereal, and that in painting in front of the subject in a dynamic situation where the light's changing, and trying to get that across, what I came to realise is that for me, painting's not really storytelling. It's not about sort of implying a narrative. It's not about symbols or meanings, or it's not even about a kind of idea of nature. It's about being in the world and experiencing. I think Frank Auerbach put it beautifully, as if seeing a table as a magic carpet with four things hanging down from it. It's sort of seeing the physical world, space, light and form, as something that really can be extraordinary. And I suppose that the thing that then drives me to want to paint a subject is seeing something that I feel overwhelmed by in some way, overwhelmed by a number of things, by its kind of beauty, by physical weight and presence, sometimes by colour, but often the first experience of the subject is almost abstract. We've all had that experience where you top the brow of a hill or open a door or turn a corner, and just for a moment, before you almost register what things are, you just see them visually. And it might be that in the second moment you think, well, I don't like that flash of white because it's a bit of plastic tarpaulin. I thought it was something else. But in that first moment, you see it in a more purely visual way, a more abstract way. And it feels to me an incredibly rich way of being in the world. So my paintings are trying to get across those moments of being overwhelmed. I had another kind of important experience before I even got to art college, where I, for the first time, saw a Lucian Freud painting, and I was overwhelmed by that, by the sort of sense of weight. So the feeling of things having that, I almost felt I didn't know a painting could do that. It could get this feeling of physicality and weight on a flat surface. And so that's that quality of sort of abstraction and pure colour and light, plus the quality of weight, are the two things I'm drawn to and are in tension with each other very often. So, for example, and I'm going to draw your attention to the tree over here. This is an ancient yew tree in Stanmer Park, and it encapsulates both qualities, because it's a thing with weight and form and mass, and it's also almost camouflaged by what the light is doing with it, by the way the light both around it and on it seems to break up the form. So your first experience is perhaps more an experience of light and colour, something more abstract, and then this process happens as you start to decode it, and you see it's what I hope is it makes you see things in a way that's fresh, that's slightly different. And I painted that yew tree many times. In fact, there's one on the high street I bagged the old tourist office window, so there's one in there as well. And there's a tiny little one over there. Another subject that has a similar kind of meaning for me and has a similar but different quality is this, a number of the rocks at Hope Gap, but particularly the one in that large painting on the other end. In that one, there's a sense in which, again, this rock has this feeling of presence, of form and weight, but it's also slightly disguised by its background foreshore, which is in such similar colours to it that it happens, I think, over time for me as I'm looking at the subject, that the form reveals itself. It's not stark against a white sky, it's against this complex foreshore. And so it both has this quality of weight and form, but also abstraction, which is a thing that I'm not dealing with in every painting, but I often am. Again, this is a view focusing in on rock pools, and so again takes a little. There's both the reading of it as something abstract and just as light and colour, and then the sense of its form as well. And so that's really been one of my key repeated interests as a painter, is this quality of a tension between form, weight, presence, and a kind of immaterial quality of light shifting, changing, and forms sometimes taking a while to read. And in that space, there's a sort of a moment to see things fresh. So that, and really that, I sort of, as a subject, my very first subject that I felt started to deal with that was soon after leaving art college. I spent a couple of years just painting in woods, usually looking into the light, and that was, so I spent 2 years doing pretty much nothing else, and that I've now found other subjects that offer me something similar, but I still do a lot of woods as well. So that's the kind of why. It's that sense of, it starts, in a way this is logic after the event, because it starts really with just being very overwhelmed or moved by a subject. That's really what makes me want to paint it. But then I think I've noticed some common themes. I even find it in the North Lanes in Brighton, because visually that's so much colour bouncing around and colours rhyming that again you can experience it very abstractly first, and then it starts to read. So it's a theme that I explore in different settings, and each one I feel kind of aids my understanding of others. And then the how is really that, as I said before, I'm really, it only comes alive for me if the subject is in front of me. I'm not very good, some artists can, but I'm not very good at conjuring things up afterwards. The moment the subject's not there, I find the intensity of concentration is not there either, and I'm just fiddling around. So it's not. I have to have the subject there with it changing in front of me, which creates a feeling of urgency, because I've got a very short time something's moved me, but I know it's also going to go soon. And there's a sort of, I think there's almost a slight melancholy in that too, that feeling that of things passing. But the process that I use is first of all, I always start by, if I arrive at a subject, I start by viewfinding. I start by trying to work out what kind of composition works best. And works is a term that does a lot of work for painters. I always use the term works. And it's really about what works in order to get across what moves me about the subject. So there's endless ways you could frame any of these things. You could have more sky, less sky, zoom in more, take a wider angle, and as I frame, I'm starting to understand why I've stopped and looked at this view, because I start to think, hang on, it's not the sky in this, say, location. It's a close-up of these shapes, or So I'll start to through viewfinding and working out, which I normally just do like that. I'll be working out why I've stopped and looked at that, and once I've worked out the composition I want to do, I then usually take quite a fair time drawing out, and I try to draw out really accurately. So this first stage is quite is usually slowish and problem solving, and not really off the nervous system. It's sort of it's trying to get it right. So measuring, looking at angles, trying to understand the structure, and I see it as a kind of armature for the painting. The drawing process, as in where things go, remains open until the painting's finished. I might have to change things for either because I realise I got it wrong, or it needs to change for the composition. But it starts just with line, no shading, and when I'm happy with the drawing, I then usually start painting very fast, because the light that I'm looking at is the one I want to try and catch as much as I can, and I'll start working quite quickly. But there isn't quite a set order. I've always wished I could find one, but I haven't found one still. So sometimes I'll work from dark to light, sometimes I'll work from the middle tones out to the edges. Sometimes I'll think this is so complicated I actually have to start in one area and find all the neighbouring colours, and then when I've got some of those I'll start working more across the whole picture. So it depends on the particular subject. If it's a very complicated subject, I might have to just focus on colours as they sit next to one another, next door neighbours as it were, because you can judge the colours better when they're sitting next door to each other. But the trouble then is if you do that for too long, the corners don't relate to the middle or whatever. You end up with a sort of sense in which you haven't caught a single thing across the surface enough. So there's this constant balancing between these different competing demands. And I usually start with large brushes, and the brushes get smaller as I go along. But again, it's not always that way. All the paintings are done in oils, and oil paint is really a medium I'm very deeply in love with, and it's as much part of there's a kind of feedback that happens in painting where you might have started with this strong response to the subject, but the medium itself, the way the paint brushes onto the surface, can both suggest textures, and I suppose that's one reason I don't paint, say, from photos, is that when I've got a brush in my hand and I'm seeing the light skittering over a surface, if I have if the subject's there, I often have a feel. It's almost like touching the object. You have a feel for how the brush should land to get across the qualities of the light and the form, and so there's a kind of relation to touch in painting there, where if you work from a photo, it's a flat, textureless thing. Nothing wrong with photos. I've every love of good photography, but it's not very useful for me as a painter. And so being there and that feeling of the relation to touch is very, very important. And oil paint stays open, as those of you who've used it, or you'll probably all know actually, it stays open for several days, and the whole working stage it's wet, and so that gives you this tremendous range of possibilities. You can, according to how you hold the brush, where the brush is where the paint is on the brush, how your arm moves and everything, the paint might sit right over the top of another wet colour, push into it and merge, or drag and skitter over it so that the colour underneath shows through the colour on top. And all of those can suggest different qualities in the painting. So in here, for example, there's lots of placed colour. The colours placed deliberately and developed that way. But in something like this rock, there's lots of colours where you can see a brush mark dragging a little and allowing the colour underneath to show through the new brush mark, creating an optical mix between the colours, a mix in the eye, in the other words, which gives a kind of a shimmer between those colours. So the way you apply the paint opens up this huge range of ways of creating space, because if a brush mark's on top of another brush mark, there's a spatial relationship. It will help the feeling of the illusion of depth, or it might make it feel like parts of it there's little light bits catching, and there are little darker bits in there that are in shadow. So it's the way you apply the paint can create a tremendous range of effects and textures, and as I say, being open like this both makes it difficult but also very rich. There's so many possibilities in how it can be used. So I think that's enough of me talking. But if anyone has any questions before we can just have a look at the exhibition. Oh, okay, Sarah?
Tom, you talk about obviously wanting to get things done quickly because of the light changing and you've lost the moment if the
Yeah.
light's moved. So how long did it take you to do that?
Well, what I do is I try and go back when the light is the same, and so which it never is entirely, but I will. The first session can be quite long because of all the drawing out and everything and composing, and then in subsequent sessions are basically 2 hours, because any longer than that the light is not similar enough, and if you combine different lights, the kind of poetry of it's gone. It's got to have the feeling of being a particular time. It's in the particularity that for me the magic is there.
So as well as capturing that magic, you've also captured that little spot that you're standing and putting your...
Yes, I do sometimes think I'm in the right spot and then realise I'm not and I've messed it all up. So that does happen. And also, obviously, they're complicated by light plus tide for something like this. So sometimes it won't be quite the right tide, but I'll think, well, I'm going to leave it as it was. But very often when I go out, I change more than I thought I was going to change, because it doesn't stay alive if you fiddle too much. Sometimes it does, but very often I find I change quite a lot.
So all your fiddling's done on the beach, not back in a studio?
Yeah, I do bits in the studio at the end sometimes, but the only way I can make that work is it's sometimes 6 months after, and I'll think, oh, do you know what, I didn't quite have that. But it's only small changes. I'm quite wary of doing too much. Sorry, you wanted to...
Oh yeah, can you talk about your color palette? Do you use a standard set of colors and stick to that, or do you adapt it for the environment?
Well, I actually pretty much almost always paint with the same colours. And so they just they're used in different combinations for different paintings. And if I'm working in a town, it expands a little, so that I might use a bright, a cadmium red and a viridian or something like that. But apart from that, I use the same sort of eight or nine colours because it's a palette that I can make most things out of. So it's just to do with how they're combined more than anything. Yeah.
What colours do you use?
A list. Well, that's a tricky question. I use white, usually like a Windsor yellow. I'll give you that another time, because probably to non-painters that's quite boring. But I find that question really, I'm always interested. I use a couple of bright yellows usually, so a lemony and a mid one, and then a yellow ochre, and then normally a alizarin crimson and raw umber. So raw umber and yellow ochre are my only earths that I normally use, and then French ultramarine, which is a purple blue, and a green blue, which is either Prussian or phthalo-cyanine blue. So and then ivory black. So those are the colours that I usually use. Yeah. Yeah.
Does it make much difference which season it is? I mean, it must be quite cold in winter painting, and you've got that snow one.
It does. I mean, obviously you've got temperature, but also the winter is like more early morning or evening light in the summer, in that the light's low and changing very quickly. So it's got that extra kind of beauty when it's sunny, and challenge because of the very fast changing light. And so, I had a winter, not this year, but last year, where I was mainly painting in woods on the downs, and all the ones I tried to paint in the sun failed because the light just changed too fast for me. I couldn't keep up. So the ones I was pleased with were overcast ones in the end. Yeah, it does make a difference. And obviously in the spring and autumn, things are changing really quickly, the season as well. Yeah.
Is there any particular artist that you adhere to?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's one I adhere to, but there's a lot of artists that mean masses to me. And in a way, my if I had to pick two favourites, they're not landscape painters. They're Rembrandt and Velázquez would be my two favourites, which is not terribly original. I'm sure lots of people's favourites too. But of landscape painters, I've always particularly loved Monet and Constable. I loved the Constable Turner show, but I'm on the Constable team really more than anything. But yeah, but lots of different ones. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, sorry. Yeah.
How long do you stand or sit until you decide what you're going to paint?
Well, it's true. I often have a place where I'm going every day. So, if I'm having a period of painting in Hope Gap, that's where I go every day. And there's therefore usually quite a kind of backlog of things I want to paint. While I'm working on one, I'm sort of thinking, and in a way, I find if you go to a place for the first time, you often find the more obvious views or whatever, and then you start to realize what really interests you if you're there for a bit. So I tend to I'll know what I'm going to do because I've been dying to get on with it at some point, but then equally I might get distracted by some other thing that I hadn't noticed. So yeah.
How do you get a big painting like that down to the beach 3 days running when it's wet?
I have a sort of thing I designed. It's not very high tech, but that I can hold two canvases facing into each other with a spacer, and then carry it. But Hope Gap is. I hope you'll all campaign to get those steps open because it's now the steps are cut off and it's a long walk round and there's not that much time because you get cut off much earlier. So there is a rope hanging down, but I haven't braved that yet.
I'm interested you should mention Monet there, because as soon as I saw those splash point things, I thought Rouen Cathedral or Haystacks.
Well, I mean, he did the series paintings, and also I think the example of the those late water lily paintings is an example of that theme I'm kind of interested in that I referred to of a field of colour that's a plane going back, but you read it abstractly too. That sort of interests me. He found water lilies in the end as the thing that could carry the whole weight of his vision.
It's almost a pity to split those up by selling them to different
Yes,
people.
it is. Yeah, really too late. Yeah.
I think you depict chalk so well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I'm always moved by the way that you paint chalk cliffs.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And still trying to think, how did you do that Calgap painting?
Do you mean the huge one? Yeah.
So how do you do it? So with those splash point paintings, for example, do you kind of put the cliff into one mass of dark and then look at the lights in the darks? How would you approach it?
I tend to squint and then try and paint the colour it mostly is, because in a way the squinting turns your eyes into something more like a camera. You're taking a single reading for the whole view, and then as you look into the shadows, you start to see other colours that, like if when you squint and look at the cliff, it looks like a slightly purpley grey in shadow, for example. As you then look into it, you might see warm colours also bouncing into it. So it's mostly a purpley grey, but actually you realise there's other things going on in that colour. And so I'll try and do what it mostly is, and then try and find these other things, these other qualities to the colour as I progress the painting. So it's sort of trying to find that balance between the thing, because you often look at these things and, well, it's a purpley, grey, creamy, yellowy thing, and you can't be all those, but it might be mainly one with shades of something else going on, and it's finding that relationship, I think. Good. Okay. Well, I think that's me done. Thank you.